Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Fishing. It's a metaphor that's applied relentlessly to marketing. Catch the big fish. Be the big fish in a small pond. Choose the right bait. Shooting fish in a barrel. Don't be a fish out of water. There's even an agency in Arizona called Big Fish. In an earlier episode of Renegade Thinkers Unite, John Miller of Engagio talked about spearfishing as a metaphor for account-based marketing. Now, perhaps I'm fishing here for a storyline, but today's guest credits his success as a marketer to being and helping his company be a big fish in a lot of small ponds. And that piqued my curiosity, or perhaps I should say, I bought this idea hook, line, and sinker. Okay, so that's a lot of fish puns, and we're going to move on. But to help us swim through the shark-infested waters of micro-targeting, welcome Ian Howells, Head of Marketing at Sage Intacct. Welcome, Ian, to the show.
It's good to be here.
Sorry about all the fish stuff, but we got to mix things up here at Renegade Thinkers Unite. So, first of all, I read that your company was acquired by Sage in 2017 for $870 million. That's a big number. Maybe you could provide a quick explanation of what you all do and why Sage wrote that big check.
So we're a cloud financials company. And I think the key thing around financials is historically, people look back at the last 3 months, and the CFO is already historians. So what we enable them to do is to look at data in real time, and in a board meeting make real-time decisions and then plan for the future. So a great example would be one of our customers of the year, which is Howells, which is a family office who invested in real estate and direct investments. They took 200 hours to consolidate for the books. So when it's that painful, you do it once a quarter. Now they do it in real time and in minutes, and they know their financials instantly. And what's kind of interesting when you talk to customers is the initial pain is takes too long or it's too expensive. You talk to that same customer 2 years later, they've forgotten about the 200 hours and they just say, we did 3 more investments because of this, because now we can look at our data in real time. So that's really what we do. And there's a common theme is the initial pains are cost and time. Then people focus on growth and risk.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Cool. Okay. That's really helpful. And you have a PhD in distributed database systems. First of all, should we be calling you Dr. Howells?
No, that's quite all right.
All right. It's funny. I was on the phone today with a PhD professor who was a doctor. So there you go. Anyway, I'm imagining that your expertise with database has become more valuable in the last 20 years, especially as sort of B2B marketing has become more scientific. Have you found that, or did you get that degree and sort of, okay, that was that?
No, so I kind of got the degree. I got very lucky with the timing. It was in 87 when the relational databases was the hottest thing on the market. But I think the biggest thing you take from it is it makes you really data-driven. And you can kind of understand artificial intelligence and machine learning because it's kind of the next wave of managing data. So it's been very useful in making marketing much more metrics-driven and ABM-driven and using AI extensively.
So there you go. That's and that is probably the part that most of the CMOs that I talk to really suffer in that's not where they're trained. I mean, so many come from brand building and understanding that aspect of it, but the science side is much harder for them to get their minds around. Okay, so let's move to Renegade Rapid Fire and just see how far we can go in the next 6 minutes. So first of all, where are you from originally?
From London.
Okay. And what's your definition of marketing?
So for me, marketing, everybody talks about ABM, and what's really important is content that's relevant to prospects and customers. So for us, it's been never more important to really know and understand your customers, but to communicate really succinctly, almost thinking like a billboard rather than a paragraph, and to be able to apply it consistently from messaging from like 10 seconds to a minute to 5 minutes to 30 minutes is really just expansion of the same messaging. And our approach is a micro-vertical approach. Now, you think about, I always kind of smile when people say we're focused on manufacturing. What they're really saying is trains and planes and cars and toys are fundamentally the same thing, which is crazy. Everybody kind of gets that. But people are going to get that in the manufacturing context, but then you say, oh, we're focused on financial services. That's just equally as diverse because USAA, Wells Fargo, and Lehman Brothers are just as diverse. So we take it one level down. We don't look at financial services. We look at very specific things like asset managers and family offices. So really making it very, very specific, where the community of people is very, very similar. And they have similar pains, and they talk to each other, and they socialize. So for us, we found that SIT codes don't work. It's really around synonyms. And that's where AI comes in to find similar kind of patterns of customers.
Interesting. Okay, I want to circle back on that, but we're going to keep going. So what's your, so then you've pretty much defined the primary role of the CMO, for you at least, is find these verticals and get to know them and market to them. I mean, that sounds like what you do day in and day out.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's your proudest moment as a CMO?
So I think actually it was when Sage acquired us, because we were very well prepared for it. We kind of created a company that was really attractive to buy, and we had our messaging straight, and it was just a very well executed campaign to exit.
And what part of the marketing that you sort of did that made this, I mean, because what they're buying in theory is they're buying the sort of the clients that you have, and the opportunity to sort of integrate it with their product and sell it to their product. But what is it about the marketing that you did that you think helped Sage sort of see the value of the company?
It's twofold. It was our expertise on the cloud, but then the other thing was the predictable number of opportunities that marketing was generating per quarter. And I think, it's interesting, no matter how clever the campaigns you do, you're ultimately measured by the number of ops or opportunities that you generate. And we had a very predictable, repeatable model.
That's very cool. All right, I want to come back to that as well. Is there a book that you've read recently that made you rethink something? And it doesn't have to be a business book. It could be anything.
So there are 4 books I think are kind of the Bibles for me. And there's some of them are old and some of them are newer. I think you're either creating a market or competing in the market. And creating a market, the classic is Crossing the Chasm and then the Blue Ocean Strategy. And then the other one is when you're aggressively competing in the market. I think Marketing Warfare by Tratt and Reese is the Bible.
Yep, read both of those.
Yeah, and Positioning Force as well.
Right, and then what's anything new on your list?
The book I read most was recently about telling customer stories. So I think the most powerful, I can't remember the exact name of the book, but the most powerful way to describe your product or your company is through an example of a customer story. So I read a whole bunch of books on customer stories and the way the brain works around listening to stories as well.
Yeah, I have a stack of them. And, it's one of those words that everybody's talking about. I hear lots and lots of marketers talk about storytelling, but I'm not seeing a lot of storytelling.
So you need to make it part of the culture. So every person in marketing, every person in sales should be able to tell 2 or 3 stories without a PowerPoint, over a glass of wine, over a conversation. They should be compelling and interesting and about real people.
Yes, they should, as opposed to speeds and feeds and other things. Okay, I don't know if you're a Netflix fan, but if you are, do you have a favorite show?
Oh, I've got 2 favorite shows, and an analogy as well was like Game of Thrones and Ray Donovan. And I think Netflix is a really interesting metaphor for marketing, because I think you can look at other similar companies, but you can look outside your space at what other kind of great companies are doing. And Netflix is great at content binging. So if you see Game of Thrones, it will recommend the next episode. If you don't want to see that, I'll recommend maybe Ray Donovan. So people have come to think about content binging as being normal. And when they come to a website, they should be able to binge in a similar kind of way, in a B2B sense as well, which is what we've done.
Yes, and I do want to go to your website. Again, we'll get there. Okay. What's the best advice you were ever given?
Work for great people. Choose your boss really wisely, because that's who you primarily learn from. Yeah,
gosh. I know, and I get a lot of calls from folks who aren't working. It's very hard to find a leader who was both inspiring and sort of instructive at the same time, right?
Absolutely.
It is. So, yes, that's great advice. I love that. Do you think, this is particularly interesting because of your PhD, but do you think machines will ever be able to do your job?
I think they'll do part of my jobs better. So, for example, when you do in microvertical, segmentation is key. And it's kind of interesting in that how AI can really fundamentally change the way you do that. So historically, from my experience, a true microvertical you can't find through a SIC code or a NAICS code. So you tend to do more research around synonyms, and it's pretty manually intensive. Or you find associations of similar kind of companies. AI can do that. A, it can do it, and B, it can do it better by looking at more feature sets. So I think certain things it's just fundamentally better at because it can look at more data more quickly and more features.
Yeah. What won't they be able to do?
I think there's the personal. I think one of the core things we do here is we interview customers and get to know them, and they get relationships with them. I just don't think AI can do that.
Yeah, I think that that's the tricky part because you have to be in the moment, and even with things like next best action,
yep.
You still might miss some bit of empathy that will lead you to say, maybe we want to talk about just the weather at the moment, right?
I think obviously you're a great interviewer. There's an art in interviewing. I think people spend years getting good at it, and I think that's something that you can't do with a bot.
Yeah, I know. And I want to ask you about that too, because I see more and more bots on websites and they're sort of dancing there and it's like, hey, can I help you? And at least so far I have resisted the urge. But all right. So last question in this section, and then we'll get into the heart of micro targeting. What would you be doing if you weren't a marketer?
Running triathlons.
Well, wait, you could do that anyway. You just wouldn't have as much time to train, right? But that's impressive. Do you actually compete in any of those areas?
Yeah, I used to, and I still work out every day. And the other thing I really would probably do would be go and watch rugby in every rugby country in the world.
There you go. More rugby. Okay, very cool. All right. Thank you for those. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll really dive into what it means to be a micro vertical marketer. Did you know that Renegade Thinkers Unite was ranked number 2 of the top 10 podcasts for CMOs by Crackerjack Marketing? Wow, we're really honored. Now, we couldn't do that without amazing guests, and we've had some amazing CMOs on this show, and also terrific listeners like you all. If you like what we do here, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Also, as a special thanks, I'd like to send you a free ebook on Renegade Thinkers. Now, for that, just email drew@renegade.com. Now, let's get back to the show. Okay, we're back, and let's get back to this big fish, lots of small ponds story. First of all, how did you sort of get started? Because and maybe you could advise, so if a company right now has a broad target, but they want to think about it, how do you get started in this road of micro-targeting? So
I think it's kind of interesting, because I've done startups and I've done kind of mature companies, and it's kind of different. And it's interesting, everybody thinks they can read Crossing the Chasm and do it, but most people execute it pretty poorly. So with a startup, you're almost starved of customers to interview, so you're kind of scratching around. And in a mature company, you have a large number of customers. The problem is you don't know where to start. So, and what we've created is based upon what we did with Jeffrey Moore in the Documentum, really evolved that over the next 20 years, a kind of a 10-step process. So, when it works really quickly. I can talk to the 10-step process, but I can also give an example. When I came to Sage Intacct, financial services was financial services, which, as I said, was very broad. And it was very difficult to know where the success was. So what we found was by looking at every single row in the Salesforce database, the SIC codes didn't really help, but really going to the website and really looking at the words they used to describe themselves or synonyms, we saw that we were actually very successful in family office, which is where for high wealth individuals. And we started focusing on the family office vertical, micro vertical. We grew it from managing $150 billion of assets under management to $1 trillion in a year. So when you get it right, it works really very quickly, and you tend to be replacing competition that's kind of legacy competition. So the traditional people you compete against are not there.
So if we were to sort of define a micro vertical, it's one where the folks in this community are a community. They have common needs. They have common values. They probably read the same kind of information, so that if you really ultimately can develop a deep set of expertise and know more about their business, or at least their business in relationship to your business, more than probably they do, right? I mean,
you hit the nail on the head there. I think that the core thing we focus upon, and the fundamental part in the process, is interviewing the customer and understanding the customers. And the analogy we have is like, so many people have gone on target account selling courses, solution selling courses, spin selling courses. Where's the course to make you best in class at interviewing customers? Because that's where the knowledge comes from. And then the core thing then is to interview more customers than your competitors will, to understand the market better. And then really, if you think about most CFOs, if they have a problem or they want to fix something, they'll probably confide in 2 or 3 other people, not 50. So if you do 50 interviews, you end up knowing more about the market than the people within the market. That's really the ultimate goal.
Yeah, that's interesting. This sort of aligns a lot with some of Brent Adamson's work with Challenger Customer, initial work. But it's harder, and one of the issues with that was it was very hard to get this knowledge and then train these folks, the sales folks, so they really could go in and be experts and advisors, as opposed to salespersons who, basically, hey, buy my widget. So there's got to be a number of things that you did in addition to identifying this group. Okay, so we've identified, and you said family offices. Then what is the process for getting these folks to sort of be, so you can get from, 1% penetration of that category to whatever your goal is?
So the key thing is really identifying the type of customer, and the visionary customer. If you haven't marketed them, it's really discovered the problem, they discovered the solution. It's really about identifying those people and interviewing them. And then you kind of cluster them by getting your hands dirty with the data, which is really going through the existing customers, going through every website. Then we have a really structured interview process, which lasts 45 to 60 minutes. And most people are pretty bad. Like you've obviously spent a lot of time getting great at interviewing. Most people are pretty bad at it. And you're listening to interviews with a customer, and the first thing that people will say is, "Can you tell me about your pains?" And you're never going to get any kind of good answers around that. So we've invested a lot of time in the art of the interview, and the final question we always ask is there any question I haven't asked that you think I should have asked? You get some amazing insights into a vertical by doing that.
Yeah.
And is there anything that you think I should know? And we've identified industry associations, key publications, key influencers. So that's really investing really heavily in the interview process has been really key. Getting people to rehearse in front of people. And then if you interview like 50 customers, how do you embody that knowledge in 50 interviews? We'll use the classic Jeffrey Moore 10-point plan. And then within that, the outcome of that, which you expose to the world, is the positioning and messaging. And then you feature within that stories that identify each month that are very typical of every micro vertical. So within that micro vertical, prospects want to talk to people as similar to them as possible, with similar kind of situation. And you make that part of the culture through the kind of the way you identify the sales kits. And you get people not just trained, but certified on the micro vertical and then customer storytelling. And you make those sales kits you do not want 80-page sales. They're like 2 pages. Like here's a bit about the industry. Here's a bit about lists within the industry. Here are the pains around time, cost, growth, and risk. And here's the messaging, and here's the dictionary of key terms that people within the industry expect you to know about. So, for example, in family offices, they don't measure themselves by the number of employees, it's assets under management or fair market value. And if you're talking to somebody in that industry, they expect you to know those things.
Interesting. So I want to go back to, so when you do this research and you've sort of identified these 50 folks, what's amazing is you've also, in that process, suddenly, you have a lot of content that you could repurpose in theory.
So you've got the whole content to write a Jeffrey Moore 10-point plan. You've identified really interesting people with interesting stories that you can have present at conferences. You can have them present to analysts and the press. So you've already filled your pipeline of interesting people with interesting stories as well. And you've created great relationships.
And how do you, people's time are valuable. Are you paying these people to be interviewed? How are you getting these interviews in the first place?
I think the key thing, and that's a really great question, is if somebody wants, say, $25 Amazon voucher for doing something, that's not really a relationship you want, because I think one of the key things that I enjoy most about doing this is when you interview people and you get to know them and you get them featured and you enhance their careers and they get promoted. I mean, that's a real buzz, because you've enhanced their career. So I think you want to have people who want to tell their story and kind of just, you're the platform to showcase the great job that they've done. That's a different kind of relationship.
Well, and I want to stop you there for a moment, because the key thing is the word platform. It's like people, to be honest, they want to be on the show, they want the exposure, but also, when it works out, they want to be on Ad Age because that's good for their personal brand. So they will take the time and because Renegade Thinkers Unite is a platform. How have you as a brand at, Sage Intacct developed, it's Intacct, developed a platform that would be worthy of someone investing an hour with you all?
So I think that the key thing around customers is, the phrase I always use is a customer is a hero, not a case study. You want to create a culture around customers. So people always start putting the customer first, but if there's potentially a story in the press, we had a choice between ourselves or a customer, we'd always get the customer to be put forwards to tell their story, because it's more interesting. If there's an award to be done, we put the customer, we have a whole series of customer awards. So really in the way we kind of think about messaging and explaining our company, explaining our product to the external world is through the voice of the customer, making everybody capable of telling consistent customer stories.
So I guess I want to make sure I'm not confused, because what I thought I understood was that as you were going into a market, you would do all these interviews. So that's one thing. That's different, right? That's different than, say, going to all your customers and making them look like heroes, which is another part of this. Absolutely. But you can't break into a new market. So I guess what I'm really trying to get at is, how do you get these stories when you're breaking into a new vertical and you don't know everything? Because that's why you're doing all these interviews, right? I
think that's the key thing there is, a mature company versus a startup. The startup is starved for people to interview, whereas you have a number of people to interview. It's just selecting the clusters of people within a micro vertical. So you go from maybe a large sample size to a small one. Then you do kind of interviews that really the whole goal is around learning rather than put them on a platform.
Right, selling them, right.
Yeah, so it's more about, let me learn about your industry, because you're a visionary customer and somehow you discovered us. You discovered that we're a great fit for your particular micro vertical, and you've done really innovative things with us without us almost talking to you. Can you just tell me what you've done and why you chose us? And then there's a whole kind of interview process around that.
So I want to put a big exclamation point and just make sure I've got clarity on this. So step one of this process, besides identifying the category, is training employees. First of all, they have to sort of buy in that this is what we do, right? We're a micro vertical target. They have to buy that in and believe that story. Yep. Then you have to train them on, the basics of an industry, and then you have to train them and even certify them on being interviewers. And it sounded like you've done some of these interviews yourself. Are they spread out across the organization so that everybody touches them, or is that primarily marketing and salespeople doing the interviews?
That's a great, because if part of the culture is the most important thing around learning about micro verticals, interviewing customers, the very last thing you should do is outsource it to some outsourced writer. If this is so important, your key people should be doing this, and your key people should be really good at it. Your key people should be certified at it. So we have somebody, initially I came into industry marketing and kicked off with financial services and discovered family office. We have people for each individual micro vertical whose sole job is to understand that micro vertical and understand what we call the bowling alley. So when you have a head bowling pin, like a single family office, it really leads on to multifamily office and asset managers. So they're really responsible for the interview process throughout the whole Jeffrey Moore kind of bowling alley analogy. So these are really senior people, and this is kind of one of the most critical things you can do within the company. So the worst thing you can do is A, outsource it, or B, be bad at it.
Interesting. Okay, we're going to take a break. We're going to have to come back to the bowling alley thing, because I'm a big bowler, and so I want to hear more about that. So we'll be right back.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back and we've been talking about micro verticals, but what's interesting to me is that it's not as simple as say, hey, there's this group of people out there that have some commonalities to our past customers. There's a real process here that starts with training employees to be good interviewers, not outsourcing and teaching folks how to listen, which is hard, and do it actively. So how do you know, because you, in theory, you could have 1,000 micro verticals. How do you know when you've achieved a certain level of success so it's time to add a micro vertical?
So I think the key thing is people stop too early. So if you stop at 5 thinking you know the answer, you're crazy. So it's more like at least 20. And then you kind of see, when you see the same pattern occurring over and over again, the same phraseology, and the same kind of pains, then you know that when you know you can almost predict what people are going to be saying, then you know that you've understood the micro vertical.
So one of the things that a lot of companies face, and I maybe you've already given the answer, but they're looking at a vertical, and let's say they're really strong in pharma. And they're within pharma a certain type of, let's just say pill manufacturers, right? They're really good at that, and they have all of that covered. Then they want to move to another target that has some similar regulatory and manufacturing capability, but they have no customers in that, so they don't have nothing to leverage. How does that transition to a new micro vertical work, and how do you get that first client to, as they say, eat the oyster, because they're brave, because you can't walk in and say, before you had family offices, you didn't have family offices, right?
So I'll give a couple of stories around that, because it's a really fundamental question. And I'll give a documentary example, which is written up in Crossing the Chasm, which I was involved in, and then more of a recent Sage Intacct version. So pharma is more than pharmaceuticals, because it can be research and development for new drugs and manufacturing, and they are very different beasts. They almost don't talk to each other. So the classic more bowling alley has a bowling pin with an application on top, and then a kind of a sub-vertical on the bottom. And Documentum started in pharmaceutical R&D and new drug applications. Then it really led on to either the same vertical with a different application, which was pharmaceutical manufacturing, with standard operating procedures in the manufacturing plant. The other one I was involved, which is kind of weird, is a drug submission is a complex 500,000-page document that's highly structured. Over-the-counter derivatives contracts on Wall Street are much smaller but more complex. So I took it I was one of the marketing guys who took the concept of a compound or virtual document from pharmaceutical R&D into Wall Street, and then within 12 months we became pretty much the standard for dealing with over-the-counter derivatives and the processing of them. So the key thing for that, to jump from a pharmaceutical R&D document to a derivatives contract, you need to have visionary buyers. So it's seeing the people who are visionary and see the potential of what they can do.
Right. So you have to find it's a classic early adopter in that thing. And so if you're in the digital transformation business, then you don't want to be talking to the people who are going to be doing it last, whatever the vertical is. Okay. So we've identified, we've trained our employees. We've gathered a heck of a lot of good customer stories, and we talked a little bit about customer stories, and I'm interested in what finesse that you found, because we talked a little bit about storytelling early on. Where have you gotten in terms of your ability as an organization to tell customer stories?
So that's one of the things we've invested heavily in around the whole kind of marketing research process, the kind of the training process, the certification process. And we just look at our website. We have riches of customer stories with great ROIs, great time reduction and cost reduction, risk reduction and growth stories. So I think our goal is to be best in class at industry marketing as an organization. And that involves really across the industry marketing people, the demand gen people, the AR, PR people, the field and sales, aligning around micro verticals and the key stories within those micro verticals.
So, okay, I get that. I was on your website, and I have I noticed a couple things. One, and you don't see this in a lot of websites, there was overtly competitive content when you sort of dug down just a little bit on it, when you just hit a drop-down menu, like how you compare versus Oracle or Ariba MIP, or if you're outgrowing QuickBooks. I thought it was really interesting that overtly there were your competition, maybe it was SEO sort of driven, but talk a little bit about actually referencing your competitors right there on the website.
So I think the key, Geoffrey Moore talks about positioning. He talks about the structure here, he does it for the 10-point plan is 4 who need to. Sage Intacct is the only that provides. And the thing that people forget about messaging is the unlike. So there's no point saying, hey, we're the same as our competition, but smaller. So every message that you articulate should incorporate why, not only why you're good, but why you're different. So I think that's fundamental, because you think about the over communication. People need to know what you do, like a billboard, in 10 seconds, and then you need to be able to. So people need to be able to think. I get what you do, and I get why you're different very quickly. So I think that's a core thing around positioning and messaging.
Okay. I also noticed, and I'm going to be honest, I was watching a video, and about, I think, 30 seconds into the demo video, it wouldn't let me go any farther. I had to give the name, and I found that annoying. Now, I'm not in the market, but is it worth it to, and perhaps you've tested this, interrupt that experience to get the name at that moment? Or particularly when you can get names, you can triangulate and figure out, he's coming from renegade.com. I could probably figure out what his name and email is anyway.
So a couple of things there. We personalize the system. So if you're for a not-for-profit, the website will look like a not-for-profit. We can do the personalization of the website for you. And I think the other key thing is to be obsessed by A/B testing. So it's interesting you brought that up, because one of the things I said was we should not gate the 5-minute demo. And then we A/B tested it, and actually the number of opportunities we generated went down when we ungated the demo. When we regated it, went back up again. So I think if you have content of value, people don't mind giving away some information. That was one of the specific things we extensively A/B tested.
Yeah, and I guess what I am sure you got more names because you had to, because you watched enough of it. I guess the question is, in watching those names all the way through the cycle, it's one way to find out if people are really interested. That's true, right?
It's a great point you brought up, because we use lean data to look at the top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, and then bottom of the funnel as well. So there was one thing to kind of get more names at the top of the funnel, but if they don't flow through, it's a waste of time. But actually, the analysis showed that it did flow through to the kind of the core coffee break demo, and then through to opportunities. So it really affected the top, middle, and bottom of funnel.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, look, if you're pressing the demo button, that's one of those signs, from the beginning of marketing automation, it was like that, and the pricing page were the two things that you could count on. Those people were more than just averagely interested. So, okay.
Just sorry to interrupt. That's one really, really important point you brought up, because there are certain key behaviors that people do, and every company there's a lot of similarities but some difference. But you should make the key levers that the customers and the prospects going to pull with one click. If you have to go down 3 pages to do that, you're crazy. Yep.
So I mentioned the bot. You mentioned the bot that's sort of dancing in the corner. I see this on almost every tech firm's page. Talk a little bit about the value of that and having that. Just, I know it's a little bit random, but it's there.
So it's interesting. So I think it's when I go into banking sites now, instead of phoning, I use the bots. I think there's a culture that people are more happy to use that. Certain people use that, and it definitely has a good conversion rate. And the other thing is around automated email responses as well. So it's much better to get an automated email response in 2 to 6 hours than in 24 hours, than a human being in 24 hours. So it's definitely, when you do the analytics, there's definitely a time to respond, and the time is critical.
And I suspect it helps, because there's that quick person you can just say, hey, I use the chat feature a lot, but I almost always it's because I think there's a real person there. And I can count on that real person solving my issue. Okay. So lots of things. We've covered a lot here in fact, we've covered almost everything that I was hoping we would in terms of what it takes to micro-target effectively. I think the only thing we didn't really resolve is sort of when do you know that you need to move on? And I suspect, yeah, right.
Great question. So I think the key thing is there's two kind of things that people tend to make mistakes is if you think about it as a bowling alley, people always want to conquer a new pin because it's kind of exciting discovering a new market. But if you're on an existing pin and maybe there are 20,000 customers, then you've got 1,000, you need to keep mining that pin until you get to the majority of the customers, and then go on to new pins. The second and third pins will drop more quickly. The other kind of thing which people make mistakes at is really creating a new micro vertical or a new bowling alley is really hard. So it's much harder to create a new bowling alley than a second and third pin. So if you can have a choice of a second or third pin and a fourth, fifth and sixth, just do that because they'll knock down much more quickly than the investment and time to create a new bowling alley.
Well, I mean, and the sort of built-in advantage of this approach that if it isn't obvious to the listeners is every time you service somebody in the same vertical, you get better at it. You get quicker at it. You find out imagine that you can probably make product adjustments because you have 100, family offices and suddenly they have one thing that they need. So you get higher and higher satisfaction. And I imagine that if we were looking at customer satisfaction, the curve just keeps growing as your penetration grows. And is that an accurate assessment?
Absolutely. You kind of go viral because if you truly have a micro vertical, these people relate to each other and very often know each other and talk to each other. And the more customers you get, the more you become kind of part of the community of people. And they all have very, very similar kind of problems. And they recommend, and you get a big referral network as well. So it's almost like a verbal kind of viral nature of the product.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny. I don't know why this analogy, but it's like, everybody has their favorite orthopedic surgeon that, he's the best guy in New York. And it becomes the thing, you're the thing for this particular challenge. And the industry. And, every time you talk to prospects and almost any sell, it's like the customer says, do you know my category? Do you know the industry? It is 1 out of 20 where, at least in the marketing world, where someone says, you know what, I want someone from outside the industry who has no knowledge because everybody here just only thinks in one way. But
so it's interesting, the analogy, which is the ERP market is the largest enterprise software market. So it's just so big, which is almost the good and the bad news. So a way to look at it from a strategic perspective, which really is what the micro-vertical approach is. It's almost like you're trying to conquer America and you've got to New York and the rest of the country is a series of hills. And some hills are incredibly heavily defended with machine guns on top. Some have little defense and some have little defense with gold, pots of gold on top. So you think about where do you start because the opportunity is so large. Well, the worst thing is to attack every hill at the same time because you're spread too thin. The second worst thing is to attack the heavily defended hills. So what you're really looking for is the hills that are undefended with pots of gold on top. And you're really, in our case, we're bringing cloud to this micro vertical for the first time, so you can penetrate the market incredibly quickly. And then then because of the viral nature of the similarity to the people on the hill, and then certain hills or bowling pins get knocked down very quickly subsequently as well. So it's much more about focus upon where you can win and win quick, and you can become the dominant player within a market within a year, particularly when the competitors are really legacy competitors.
So you mentioned in your interviewing process that you always ask the question or encourage your folks to ask the question. Is there a question that I didn't ask you? So I'm going to just ask you. Is there a question I didn't ask you that I should have?
One of the things I forgot to mention actually is good was when people use the word micro-vertical, they always assume it's small, but nearly all cases, the more you get into a micro-vertical, the much bigger it is than you initially think. So the target addressable market is almost never the problem in a bowling alley because the total addressable market is the bowling alley. Each pin tends to be way bigger than you initially think as well.
Interesting. Okay. So don't underestimate the size of the micro-vertical. Okay, I got it. All right.
The other kind of metaphor is you think about people talk about being the gorilla within the space. You can become the winner is the one that has the most micro-vertical gorillas in the end. So that's the other kind of approach that we've taken.
Excellent. This is great. Okay, well, this has officially become the Metaphor Show. We started with fishing, we moved into bowling, and then we ended it with war. I mean, my goodness, we have conquered all of the big, but it's funny, we've never done bowling on the show. War is, one that is a metaphor. For heaven's sakes, we use targeting, which is a military thing. It's amazing how many war words are in our marketing vocabulary. Anyway, I really want to thank you. This has been a fascinating, concentrated view of micro-targeting. I feel like I'm a lot smarter than I was before we started the show. So, Ian, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's been great speaking with you.
So, and to my listeners, well, hopefully you realize that this show was not a fishing expedition, that we learned a lot about the fact that you can't just say we're going to go after this micro-target. You better learn it and learn it well. In the process of learning it, you develop a culture of listening, of good question people. You also have the opportunity to get some content. So you get your employees on board, then you get your customers, and you keep getting more and more of those customers, and you can celebrate them. And then you can use those customers to acquire your new ones, and next thing you know, you've dominated a market in a year or less. What a really smart and focused way of growing your company. So thank you always, as always, for listening. And until next week, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.